Oh, hey, you're awake. Yeah, me too. I thought I heard something outside of my tent, like the leaves rustling. I think it was probably a raccoon. Maybe a coyote, I don't know. I've seen some of them here in this area. I can't get back to sleep anyway. I keep feeling like something's watching me. But hey, the night's still young, right? I just threw a couple more logs on this fire, so we could just tell some stories for a while. I don't foresee myself getting back to sleep anytime soon. You know me, I've got a lot of stories. Spent a lot of time in the woods, seen a lot of pretty weird stuff, and I've heard just as many weird stories from people I know too. I think this is one that I don't think I've told you this one yet. But a couple years ago I was canoeing on the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. I was with a couple buddies of mine. Now these aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other. Think like mini Great Lakes. We had been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at that point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned to boat, camp, fish, live off the land for a couple weeks. We brought a GPS with us and a satellite phone that was supposed to be used to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a week in, we were set to canoe a few hours to the next lake. An hour or so in, and we're in the center of an extremely long and narrow lake, and a storm starts blowing in. The waves on that lake swelled to a couple of feet, which doesn't really sound like much, but when you're in those dinky little canoes, that's too much. So we pull off to a random clearing on the shore, and we set up camp in a rush just to avoid being totally thrashed by a rainstorm. We had just set up camp, and we just decided to hunker down. By the next morning, the storm cleared up. We started walking up the coast of the lake about 200 feet from our camp, looking for a good fishing spot. What we found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked. Trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed, and torn clothes on the ground. At first we were just disgusted, thinking what asshole did this? Left their stuff out to be bear food? But the more we looked around, the weirder things seemed to get. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being about 30 feet in the air. Second, literally everything except the canoes were still at the campsite. I'm talking clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, like a serious set of hiking equipment. We figured it was enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tent, and of course the clothes. The other half was totally untouched but thrown all over the ground, like somebody noped the hell out of there in nothing but their long johns, and ditching hundreds of dollars of gear in the process. We waited a couple hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls from anybody. We eventually just left everything and moved camp. Everybody was pretty upset by it, and a day or two later we ended the whole trip early because it seemed like nobody wanted to be out there anymore. Yeah, that was pretty weird. First we thought it was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and believe me, I've seen bear attacks on camps before. Nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after the food, and are generally pretty easy to scare away. I know, I've had to do it a couple times. But what still sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, with half of them being totally destroyed and half being untouched. I still don't get it. This next story is one my dad told me about this guy he used to work with a couple years ago. I guess the dude lived out on a piece of land in the desert down in New Mexico. Way out there, like hours from anybody in any direction. I'm talking some real dirt road kind of stuff. I've heard a lot of stories about pretty strange stuff that goes on way out in those deserts. Real lonely places, You basically only have the stars, the moon, and the coyotes to keep you company. Well, anyways, the guy had just got home after a couple-week rotation out at work. Oil field stuff, right? Well, he lived with his wife and 2 kids, but I guess they were visiting his in-laws at the time, so he was home alone for a couple of days. He unloaded his stuff from his truck, locked it, then went inside and crashed out for the night. When he woke up the next morning, he went outside to drink some coffee on the porch, pretty normal stuff. But I guess when he got out there, he saw that all 4 doors of his truck were wide open. Now remember, he said that he was pretty sure that he locked them, He's not the kind of guy who forgets to do that, even out there when he's alone, Force of habit. Well, nothing was stolen out of it. The interior didn't have any dirt tracked in. There wasn't anything tore up like an animal had been in it. Nothing. Freaked him out pretty good. Well, I guess at the time he had a couple cameras set up around his property. So the first thing he does is go and look at the footage, right? Pretty normal. He's looking through it, and the whole night everything is fine until about 2 o'clock in the morning. The footage goes until it just glitches out and gets all staticky for about 3 minutes straight. And after the video goes back to normal, you just see the doors wide open. I guess the guy ended up moving his family into a town nearby a while later. He said too much eerie stuff kept happening to him out there. That story actually reminds me of a buddy of mine whose family has a cabin in the middle of nowhere, up in the forests of Washington, right? Well, about 2 miles away from the cabin and across a dirt road, I guess there's this wildlife reserve he was telling me about. Well, as a kid, him and his brother would walk through there, I guess they had the opposite of helicopter parents. He said that about 30 minutes walking straight into those woods, there's this collection of abandoned houses, like an old neighborhood or like a community or something. Well, they went exploring and found that the people who used to live there had just up and left. In each house there was still dishes on the tables, clothes in the closets, cars parked out front, everything. He said that in one of the houses, the upstairs floor had caved in. They decided not to go upstairs in any of them after they saw that. Naturally, right? Well, after they told his parents about finding these, buildings, his dad wanted to come and take a look. In one of the houses, they found a bedroom that was fully intact. Sheets were still on the bed like it had been just made. He said that there was even a pillow that still had the indentation of a head on it. Yeah, pretty weird, if you believe that. But everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the floor only had their footprints in it. At the foot of the bed was this stunning, enormous gray fur coat. There was a few moth holes chewed in it, and it was as dirty as everything else, but they thought it was real fur, like wolf or fox or something. Well, I guess his dad decided that he was going to bring it back and clean it up and see if he couldn't fix it up for their mom. Well, as they were leaving, my buddy got a chill on the back of his neck. And when they were about 60 yards from the house, he turned around and saw this old woman glaring at him from the window of the second floor. She had her hair in a loose bun and was wearing like a blue shawl on her shoulders over a cream-colored blouse. Kind of old school, Well, he said he immediately felt super guilty about grabbing that coat. So he grabbed his dad, who was about 10 yards ahead, and told him that they'd better put it back, because there was a woman that was still living there, and they probably scared the crap out of her, and she looked pretty upset. Well, they turned back around, and my buddy pointed to the window that he saw her in. But, nobody was there. Well, as they got a little bit closer to the house, still carrying the coat, one of the windows in another house suddenly slammed shut. Well, my buddy and his brother ran as fast as they could back through the woods. They were going to get the heck out of there, right? But I guess their dad stayed behind and started yelling for the lady to come out, said he was sorry and all that. But nobody came out. He waited a minute, but then he went back into the house and went upstairs. He was going to try to see if he couldn't find her, But nobody was in there. And the dust on the floor was still undisturbed, same as when they had left. Well, in any event, his dad dropped that big coat in a hurry, and they beat it back to the road as fast as they could. My buddy told me that about 5 years after that incident, some guys from the government went in and demolished the whole place. Pretty crazy, Oh, whoa. Did you see that? Yeah, it just looked like there was a light kind of cutting through the trees. I mean, it could have been a flashlight, but I figure there probably isn't really anybody else out here, right? I mean, we came in on that logging road, and I'm fairly certain I didn't see anybody else. All the other little spots were empty. I mean, I guess unless somebody came a little bit later. Could have just been my imagination, though. Ooh, but that reminds me. There was this time when I was a teenager, my family, we were all at a campground on a lake over in the Ozarks. My sister, one of her friends, my cousin, and me were all in a tent together, right? Well, I'm trying to get some sleep, but it's super humid, and I really just could not get comfortable. Well, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm looking straight up, because I could not even nod off. But that's when I notice it. There's a long flash of light outside the tent, kind of like what I just saw. Well, I look, and it blinks again about 3 seconds later, but not in the same place. It's close to the tent, probably less than 3 feet away. I couldn't see it perfectly, but I could just tell. It's not like an on and off blink. It fades in and out. It's dead quiet. Doesn't sound like there's an animal. No, nothing. Doesn't even sound like there's a person. I just couldn't understand what could make a light like that. It was super white and super bright. It blinks again, and eventually this blinking light makes its way in a circle around the tent near the entrance where I was. That's when I rolled over and I just closed my eyes, because whatever it was, I really didn't want to figure it out. Well, about 30 minutes later, I sit up to grab some water. Kinda was just trying to ignore the whole thing. I sit there for a minute wondering, and there it is again. On the opposite side of the tent from me, it's making its way around again. Well, I man up, grab my own light, and unzip the tent as it nears the entrance. The light just stops, and it goes completely dark. Well, I go outside, and I'm looking around to try to see if there was anybody out there, because my first thought was that it was probably just somebody with a flashlight creeping around our tent. But I'm telling you, there's nobody. I didn't hear anybody run away. I didn't even hear a light click off. Well, in any event, I went ahead and made a fire, and I stayed up all night trying to see if I could catch whoever it was again, but no luck. Would you believe me if I told you that's not even close to the creepiest thing that's happened to me when I've been out camping? Just this last year, a group of my friends was staying at this cabin that one of their cousins owned. It was pretty far up in the wilderness. I hadn't been out there yet at the time, but I guess there was no roads leading to the cabin. It was just about a 3/4 of a day hike from where you had to park the cars. Well, I couldn't go in the morning like everybody else was because I had to work, so I decided to head up later in the evening, which would mean that I was going to have to camp for a night by myself because the last part of the trail is really, really dangerous. Not something that anybody who doesn't know it should be doing at night. But I didn't care. You know me, I like the peace and quiet of just camping alone sometimes. Helps me to clear my head, Well, I was in the middle of these woods when the sun started to go down. So I got my camp set up in this small little clearing that was probably about 40 feet wide. Got the fire going, and pitched up my small little one-person tent. I do all the typical camping stuff, cooking hot dogs on a stick, roasting some s'mores over the fire. I probably stayed up for a good 2 or 3 hours after it got dark. It was mid-autumn, so the days were somewhat short. Well, the entire time I thought I heard something moving in the woods on the edge of the clearing. I didn't think anything of it at first, because the woods are full of animals, But as the night went, I realized that whatever it was just circling the clearing over and over. Once I started paying attention, it made about 4 or 5 laps around before I decided to get up and investigate. The noise stopped dead as soon as I stood up, and I thought I heard some sounds going away through the woods, but I couldn't be sure. Well, I just shrugged it off, thinking it was like a fox, something that had been curious and just got scared when I stood up, Maybe a coyote. I decided it was time to go to sleep, so I doused my fire, climbed into my tent, and I started to doze off. I was kind of in this half asleep state, And I normally hear weird stuff when I'm in this state anyways, so I didn't really think much of it when I thought I started to hear a voice. Well, something caused me to wake up fully, and I realized that the voice was real, and it was right outside my tent. It was just above a whisper, and I'm not sure if it was in another language, or if they were speaking English, but with a really thick accent that I couldn't understand. But I just laid there for a while, right? I have no idea how long, it felt like forever. I was just listening and waiting for something to happen. There was just enough moon to light up the walls of the tent, so I could actually see that this hand was pressed into the wall of my tent right down near my foot. When I saw that, I freaked out and I sat bolt upright. Whatever was outside the tent, It tore ass out of there, like running full sprint through the woods. I shot right out of that tent, and I shined my flashlight around, but I didn't see anything. I was expecting there to be a bloody handprint on the tent or something, but nope. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. I just kind of sat there, wondering what that was. Made another fire, Just could not go back to sleep. As soon as first light hit that morning, I packed up the camp and I booked it to the cabin. Kind of put the whole incident out of my mind, We were all just kind of having fun, hanging out. I decided not to tell anybody about what had happened, though, because I didn't really want to freak anybody out, Yeah, I still haven't really told any of those guys. My cousin has a bunch of these crazy stories, too, about these really weird things that happened to him out in the middle of nowhere. This is one that he told me the last time him and I went camping together. I guess a few years back, him and one of his friends had gotten permission to go and hunt jackrabbits on this piece of property out in a super remote area of western Idaho. I can't really remember exactly where, but I'm pretty sure he said that they had come an hour or two from the Weiser area to get in there, if you're familiar with that. The property was out in the middle of this desert, quite a ways from any city or even any small town. He said that they hadn't even passed a gas station for about 45 minutes before they got there. Well, they entered on the north side of the property, went over a cattle guard, and then went through a gate. I guess the property was kind of in a bit of a valley, and it was divided into a super flat plain, mostly on one half, and then on the other side of the property there was this big hill that spanned the length. He said that the hill probably had an elevation of about 200 or 300 feet, give or take. Well, that night they had been working the flatter part of the land with the spotlight on his truck and flashlights in hand, shooting rabbits, lamping them, if you know what that is. Well, it was a clear night, and the moon was probably about 3/4 of the way full, so it was kind of easy to see some of the elements of the property by the moonlight. They started a little after dusk, and by this time it was about midnight, and they were probably about 2/3 of the way down the length of the property when they heard this inhuman, blood-curdling scream come from the eastern side where the hill ran. Something super guttural, Well, he looked at his friend, and they both froze. They were at the truck using the spotlight looking for rabbits when it happened. Probably 400 yards from the base of the hill, I think he said. Well, my cousin starts looking through the scope of his rifle when they heard that scream again. He tried to follow the sound to where he thought it was coming from, and while he's looking through the scope of his rifle, he comes on the top of the hill, and he sees this tall, lanky figure standing with the upper half of its body silhouetted against the sky, right at the top. Looked like a person, but they figured there's no way because it would have been way too big. He said he fired a shot toward it, but his rifle was just a little .22, so he knew it wasn't going to make it to the creature, but he was trying to get it to move, trying to make sure that it wasn't like a scarecrow or something. But I mean, it wouldn't really make sense to have a scarecrow up there. It wasn't farmland. But in any event, that thing started to move down the hill towards them after he fired his shot. Oh yeah, they booked it. They booked it straight back into his truck, and they drove all the way to the edge of the property to the fence, and then they followed that fence until they got to a gate. Yeah, they tore out of that place as soon as they could. To this day, he still doesn't know what he saw, but it scared the daylights out of him, Well, yeah. What did you think of those stories? Pretty good, huh? Well, in any event, why don't you go ahead and go back to sleep, right? We're kind of burning the midnight oil, It's going to be daylight here pretty soon, and we've got a pretty good hike back to the cabin. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. I'll wake you when it's your turn to keep watch. What was that? Did you hear that? It's probably nothing. Hello. If you stuck around to the end of the video, I'd like to say that I really appreciate that. If you enjoyed today's presentation, it would really help me out if you could leave a like on the video, and then perhaps cruise on over to my channel and check out some of the other stuff that I've been working on. The primary focus of the channel is longer format casual video game stuff, sort of like I describe it as podcasts set against video gameplay. And we also have a slight lean towards nostalgia. I post 3 videos a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, so there's no shortage of content over there. And then every once in a while, usually on Saturdays, I like to post these special one-off presentations. It's just kind of a way for me to stretch my creative legs and dip into some other formats and some other genres that I also have an interest in. I do like this sort of spooky, paranormal, campfire story kind of stuff, so I plan on doing some more content like this in the future. But like I said, for now, if you would like to check out the rest of my channel, that would be really cool. Maybe even subscribe. Also on my channel, there is a link to a now dormant paranormal podcast that I was doing last year. Depending on whether or not I have the time or if people show any interest, I might revive that at some point, but otherwise my main focus is on this current channel. The stories that I read today were a combination of things that I wrote myself, as well as some other cool stuff that I found in different parts of the internet. I will have links in the show notes to any of the stories that were adapted into today's presentation if you wanted to check them out in their original format. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully we'll see you in one of our next videos.